Hi, Stan. Thank you so much for joining us here for another episode of Starting Over with Shannon. I read your book, Wired for Love, and incidentally, I noticed that your foreword was written by Harville Hendricks.
Yes,
And
I
I
love him.
recently, yes, and I recently was introduced to his work and did one of the Imago retreats over here in Europe with my husband. And I was like, do you know what? I don't know why people don't do this work before stuff gets really bad,
Yes, I know. I know.
right?
Yeah. John Gottman did a study. I think it was he that did the study that it takes an average of 6 years from the time that a couple's very unhappy to the time they actually seek couple therapy. And so that says it all, I think.
That really does. That really does. So, what your TED talk also, why are relationships so hard? I love how you titled that, by the way,
Thank
and
you.
realized, do you know what? I think so many of us have asked ourselves that very question or done some kind of late night Google in moment of exasperation about why is this not working or why is this so hard? And in the short form, the summary version, why are relationships so hard?
Because people are difficult. I said in I think the second book, Wired for Love, that there's nothing on the planet more difficult than another person, and I still stand by that. We're difficult animals, actually, human primates, and it's not just because someone's white or black or male or female, or Australian or American. No matter where we are, we do wonderful things and horrible things. That is our nature state. And unless and until we understand that and actually think about that as we're forging relationships with others, the more we think about that and the more we're prepared, the better off relationships will be.
Yeah. So I'm hearing through that the difficulties of relationships and why they're so hard.
People,
And yeah, people. But before we all just like turn this off right now and go, oh my gosh, we're doomed forever, can you give us at least a bit of good news, Stan?
well, the good news is everything we know about us. We're loving, um, and loyal and creative, and we're able to make things up that don't exist in real life, such as a relationship. Relationship is a made up thing. If you and I were in a relationship, we would be co-creating something of a mythology in terms of what that relationship is or should be. But would we? That's the problem. Would we actually do that, or would we just go on as if we are on the same page, which
Mm.
mostly we're not? So therein lies the problem. But yeah, we're creative, we're kind, giving, and we do wonderful things like run into a burning building to save a child, things that are quite lovely. And so, I think we have to look at nature as indifferent, that we have all these features, and so does nature, and all these bugs, depending on where you are, right? Almost everything we do that is wonderful also has a side to it that someone may not find wonderful. And here's an example, and more of a funny one. You and your partner get together, and you get together based on familiarity and recognition. That's nature's way of finding the two of you socially, emotionally. But also, the things that you're most attracted to are the things that are going to bug you later. So the feature is, oh my gosh, my partner is so lively and vital and expressive, and I love how they talk and how dramatic they are. And then later, my partner talks too much. They're so dramatic, and everything is important, and it just drives me crazy. Okay, that's what we do. And so, uh, so a lot of the things about us that in relationship that are taken extremely seriously, like threat, from an outsider's point of view, is often really funny. People are funny; they just don't realize it sometimes.
Yeah, I get that. I think I had that listening to a friend once, and she told me how she had a big blow up argument about her boyfriend wanted her to put chicken in the fridge in a certain way. And I was like, what is this? Like, how are you having an argument about how you store chicken in the fridge? And yet, I think we all have got some kind of story to this
Oh,
degree.
yeah.
When you're living in such close proximity to somebody, it's difficult.
It's difficult. And when it's a love relationship, even more so, because a love relationship carries with it a memory that goes all the way back to early times in childhood. It's the only one that does that, strongly so. And so there's an extra burden there, right? Memory of all these people that made me feel great or made me feel terrible, and all wrapped up in you, right? We become basically avatars or proxies for everybody that came before. And so that can be very difficult as well. That adds to the memory of, how could you be so stupid to do this? Or why did you look at me that way?
Mm. And I think that leans on something that you explore quite a lot, and that is attachment, right?
Yeah.
How we attach. But before we go into that, I want to hear a little bit about some of the relationships that you have had in your life. And maybe you can share with us your journey from your first marriage into your second, and perhaps
I thought we were going to
some of
start
the
it from with
keys.
my mother. All
Well,
right. Going all the way back.
well, to be fair, you probably is very relevant, right?
Sure. Not only that, my wife and I were talking about it this morning. I believe our early crushes in childhood become a template for people that we're attracted to later. And maybe those crushes are also based on, our feelings towards the adults that surrounded us when we were very young. Right?
Can that even include crushes of like celebrities or what you read about or
I had a mad crush on Haley Mills, a mad crush on her. And so that I know started me on my way towards a young girl, Pamela Coons, in elementary school, who I had a mad crush on, as well as a dark-haired young girl, sorry, because not a young woman, in elementary school, Debbie Haggai. Um, and so I think of those two templates, a blonde and a brunette, uh, as holding as I went through, my early part of my life. So, but
hmm.
we digress. Sorry.
We do, although it's interesting. I was just thinking about this before as I had posted a video on Instagram and lots of people resonated with it. It was kind of me talking to my former self who was constantly seeking adventure, thrill, excitement, passionate love, something intense. And now I'm looking more for balance, stable, calm, grounded, self aware. And it's like, oh, well, how did that change come about? Well, because literally I chose the most unhealthy form of love ever. And then I thought, do you know what? I had a crush on this guy, this character, Edward Cullen, as Twilight. And there was this big thing when I was a teenager. And I realized it was this like really intense, passionate love. And he was
Right.
super protective of her. And now I'm like, oh dear, no wonder why I fell for a narcissist. But anyway.
You know what? You got to give yourself a break. This is learning. Relationships is how we learn about ourselves.
That is true. So tell me about some of your later relationships then, Stan, and some of the lessons that you learned.
Well, up until my current wife, Tracy, who I had a crush on in junior high and high school, she didn't know that. But we got together in our early 40s, both of us having been married previously. Up until Tracy, there was a particular woman that I was attracted to. And, this is very common, sort of a savior fantasy where I would find women who were wounded, not really realizing that I wanted to be rescued myself. But that was to come later in terms of that realization. And so those relationships were difficult to sustain because both of us wanted healing and neither of us seemed to know how to do that. And so those relationships didn't last. And my marriage was very similar in some ways, and this led me to the approach that I eventually developed, where we actually identified with each other a little too much. And so my wife, Tracy, has this Swiss cheese theory that I think actually does hold up. You and I are a slice of Swiss cheese. We both have holes, right? If our holes line up, we're probably not going to do very well because we're going to be vulnerable at the same time, or we'll be crazy at the same time, or we'll be feeling endangered at the same time. And that was my first wife. We kept getting, and we loved each other dearly, I know this, but we kept getting threatened, feeling threatened, both of us. And it would happen more quickly again and again. And it would be astonishing in the moment, like, how are we here again? And I can't get out. And I'm sure she couldn't get out either. And that led to my studying the autonomic nervous system as a separate condition that can make it difficult for people to be together, having nothing to do with psychology. Two nervous systems that may not actually get along very well or be able to regulate each other in distress. Whereas Tracy and I, our holes don't match. So where I am vulnerable, she is not. Where she is, I am not. And so we're actually able to help each other during those times. We're actually not dysregulated as a couple. We don't get dysregulated as a couple. And that is something that's, I think, difficult in terms of pair bonding, in terms of what a matchmaker would do is how are you going to line up, find these people and to see if their nervous systems actually work well together, which does have something to do with your past, right? It does have
Yeah.
something to do with your history.
Yeah, but I don't think we start putting this on our Tinder profiles, Stan. I
No,
mean,
right. I don't think you, I don't think you can. But that
no.
that relationship broke my heart, as I'm sure it did for my ex-wife. I was a step parent for the first time. I was married for the first time. I thought it would be the only time. And in one fell swoop, it seems, I lost it all. We had a hot divorce, meaning it happened quickly. There was no real processing of it, and nerve endings were still exposed. Uh, but it ended rather quickly, and then she disappeared. So that was probably the hardest, not probably, it was the hardest time in my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was most certainly the walking dead. And I was obsessed with finding out how that happened and what I had done wrong that I never wanted to repeat again. So the only thing that saved me during that time was my analysis that I was in, and also working, teaching, working with patients, uh, helped me to get my mind off of it. But that was a really, really rough time. And
Yeah.
I did think my life was over.
Yeah. Thanks for being so open about that, Stan. I shared about this in my community yesterday, and somebody asked a question that I think so many of us resonate with. And they said, why does it feel like it's the end of the world when you break up, even though you know it's not? You somehow know it's not, but it just
I,
feels so heavy, like the floor's just being ripped beneath you. Your ideas, your expectations of life, you just fall at your feet, right? And I think that's exactly what you're pointing to here in your lived experience.
I believe the reason has to do with the biological attachment system. Nature provided us with a kind of biological glue or psychobiological glue in order to stick together as a species. We're pack animals, we run in herds. And so to glue us together so we can protect a human infant for at least 2 to 4 years of its life, we pair bond or we gather in groups to protect ourselves from the environment, from dangers. And so that biological mandate, which is I can't quit you kind of a feeling, goes all the way back to infancy. We think sometimes it's about love. We feel it as love, but it isn't. It's actually an existential threat to our survival that if you and I don't exist tomorrow after being primary attachment figures, there is a part of us that feels that's death. We're going to die just like in infancy. If mommy dies, I die. There's a memory, a feeling, albeit, sometimes a low buzz for people. Other times it takes over, and it feels like an existential threat to one's life.
That is so important.
Yeah.
So, so important. So then, in part, the difficulty with moving on is the detachment from that person and through that whole stage. Can you explain that a little bit? Like the phase of detachment and moving forward after the rupture of that attachment bond we had created with somebody?
So I'll tell you what happened to me. And I studied babies, and this is also true of how babies operate and very, very young children. So there's a certain point in time when the baby is developing and becoming more individuated, that is to say, more of a separate sense of self, of being, and separating from its primary caregiver or givers. That's locomotion and distance. That there is a problem with feeling resourced and feeling energized and always having to go back to the caregiver for refueling, right? I need to look back at, let's say it's mother, it could be father, look back to get a smile, an acknowledgement, or get back on the lap to get a hug or be held. That gives me the energy to go outside and explore the world. Now, when a stranger comes in and visits me, I can handle the stranger while being held by my mother or father. But if my mother or father go outside of the room and I'm left with the stranger, I can play with the stranger a little bit, but then I begin to feel that the stranger is keeping my mother from returning. It's a magical thought, but I have to go inside and find a picture of my mother in order to restore a sense of safety and security in me. And then I start looking away from the stranger because they're an imposter. They're not the real deal. And their presence is keeping the real deal from returning. Now, fast forward to adulthood. When we have a primary attachment partner, they occupy a seat, like an office of. Okay, so we have a certain feeling about the office itself, but then there's a person sitting in that chair. And of course, every person is a little bit different. When the primary leaves that chair, it's still occupied for some time. Could be months, could be years, depending on the person. So that when we date, we lose energy very quickly with a stranger, and we start to feel, no matter how wonderful they are, we start to feel they're an imposter. They're not the real deal. They're not my primary. They're a stand-in, like getting a dog right away after your dog dies, right? Somebody gives you a new dog. They're not the real one. And their presence is keeping the other one from returning, so to speak, or I am cheating on this person who I'm no longer with, but it doesn't feel that way. So it does take some time to fill that spot or for that seat to vacate. And for me, it took until my wedding night. Literally, my wife knows this. It took my wedding for her to actually take that seat. And
Wow.
and that was the night that I stayed up and I made a video with one of our songs, our beautiful songs that we cherish. That's our song. Um, that I did our wedding video to, and that was even thinking about it now, I could cry. So,
Hmm.
so it was that point at which Tracy fully occupied that chair, and my ex-wife departed. Before then, I was haunted, and I knew what this was because I'd studied it, and I was astonished that an adult would feel somewhat similar as that toddler or baby, that when mother's away, other people trying to fill that spot, kind of interesting, but unwanted.
That is so fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
I'm wondering, in practical terms, what are some of the thoughts or behaviors that you exhibit when you're saying, even for you in your story there with saying, your ex partner didn't vacate that seat until your wedding night because you'd
In my head.
engaged. Yes, no, of course, I got that, but like that's still quite significant, right? To build another relationship with somebody else, to make a commitment. And yet, what was happening? Did you still have thoughts about your ex wife? Did
Yes.
you doubt whether you should be with Tracy?
Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. For two reasons. One is that Tracy, and this is marvelous, is so different from my ex wife and so different from other women that I dated. And in the very best way, our differences basically is our superpower because we're really very different from each other. But yes, I was tortured by this. Tortured by this. I'd go into depression. Even while on a trip, we took to Italy. And again, Tracy knows about this. So we went to Italy, which was a stupid thing for me to do, to take her to someplace I had already gone to with her daughter, my stepdaughter. And I, in quiet moments, these memories, these images would start to bubble up, and I'd start to feel, I'm cheating on, right? I shouldn't be doing this. Or, I'm feeling this anaclitic depression, another word for mother loss, deep depression of despair. And while also not wanting to hurt Tracy, right? I didn't want her to feel any of this. At that point, our relationship wasn't completely transparent as it is now because we tell each other everything without fear. But had it been that way then, it would have been a lot easier. But it was torturesome. And I think this is about the grieving process that not everybody's going to experience what I experienced. So I want to say that out front. And a lot of people don't experience anything. They will eventually when the chickens come home to roost, but it's easier for them to trade out partners. But for me, it wasn't. And so I think that I knew Tracy was right for me, and I was sticking with her because I knew that facilitated the grieving process further. So I had to cope with this as a grieving process and not confuse what the right thing was to do, as opposed to what my feelings kept pushing me toward, which was to disengage and to long for, someone else. So it was quite an experience and quite a learning experience. And I was very lucky to have someone who was very patient with me. uh, right.
Yeah. I think that is such an important point. Let me just check or break this down. So I know that there are many people, I think I am pretty sure I had this myself too, when I separated from my ex partner, even knowing that it wasn't right, instead of seeing it as being a natural part of the grieving process, I would interpret that to mean that I should instead be with him.
Yeah.
Is that the common experience that people could have and get confused by?
I think what I'm trying to say is that the attachment biology that we all are going to experience, some to a greater or a lesser extent, isn't love. It isn't love. It is a loss at the deepest level if we choose to go there. And that's why it's so extraordinarily compelling and haunting and sticks around, right? Because it shouldn't happen that someone who we loved and loved us still exists on the planet, but doesn't love us anymore or isn't with us anymore, right? It's harder than death because death, we can at least tell ourselves, well, the person's gone. But when we break up, divorce, they're here, they're still around. And that becomes something that to a part of us, we can never reckon with, no matter how intellectually we know that this was not right and we're better off. There's a part of us that will continually ask, but why? But why? If your audience has ever done this before, talked down by a friend who is tirelessly answering that question. Stan, you knew, Shannon, you knew, you talked about all the things that were wrong and everything. Yeah, you're right. You're right. I feel better now. Thank you so much. And then like 10
Yes.
minutes later, but why? Because it's an itch that cannot be scratched, because it's not supposed to happen in terms of survival. We're not supposed to lose the people upon whom we depend and we form this intense bond with roots go very deep, right? And so I think that is why there are all these different manifestations when breaking up.
In your research, have you ever come across a general ballpark amount of time that it takes for people to detach and to be open to new love and to attaching to somebody else? Because I think it's a question that comes up for a lot of people is like, how long am I going to be in this grieving process for? How long is it going to be before I'm even open to being with somebody else again?
I got to say, grief takes its own time,
Hmm.
but people can delay it. And a lot of people do. One such delay is to demonize your partner, spend time, focusing on them, how terrible they were, and not on yourself, not on oneself. What did I do? What were the mistakes I made? What do I need to learn for the future? That's why I say it's a good time for contemplation, for individual therapy, but cautiously, because that why is constantly in a loop. We perseverate because there's a part of us that's stomping feet, saying, "Say it ain't so. I don't want to accept this loss." And one way to make it so is to burn all the bridges, right? To demonize them, to make them horrible people. And we won't grieve that way either. In anger, we don't grieve because anger is a vital emotion, meaning it's sympathetic. It bonds us, connects us, and it is far away from grief and depression and sadness as can be.
Can you break down what you mean by anger is sympathetic?
So if we look at states, potential human states, body states, mental states, but emotion, feeling, as we go up into the high notes, like an orchestra, the trumpets, the high pitched notes, we get into the active sympathetic states of moving toward pupils dilating, excitement, heart rate going up. Um, we are alive. This is the life energy, our libidinal energy that opens up. So I call them vitality states, the upper range of sympathetic arousal, which actually gets us out of the birth canal, moves us toward people, right? But it's also rage, it's also terror, it's also dissociation, mania, but it's also joy, vitality, right? Love, sex, all of that. Whereas the lower states, parasympathetic states that are more restrictive, more hesitant, more along the lines of inhibition or holding back, sleep, meditation, contemplation, relaxation, digestion, but also depression or anaclitic depression, like I said, an abandonment depression, um, or shame, going all the way down, or life threat, going further down to where we faint. So those are the low states, kind of the low notes, the bass notes, right? And that is the area where we start to feel grief products, sadness, regret, depression, and hopefully we're able to mobilize out of depression and sob, cry, feel sorry for ourselves. That allows the brain to become more online. That's why we feel better after a good cry, right? Because there's more of us online to digest the experience that we're trying to grieve, right? The loss.
So, does this mean that many of us would voluntarily stay in a state of anger or hostility or
Could.
something because we feel more threatened to feel the lower state emotions that you're describing?
Yes. Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah. That has been called by Melanie Klein long ago as a defense, a manic defense against depression. We all know that we'll try to keep busy. We'll laugh about things in order not to feel sad. We'll make jokes. We'll stay away from negativity and, be conflict avoidant. That's another form. And so all of this prevents people from being able to grieve their loss. And if we can't grieve, we can't grow up. If we can't grieve, we can't actually work in a team with another person because we're acting as if we haven't lost anything, and we have. And that has dire consequences for relationship.
Yeah. So then I guess this goes without saying, but in the context of people who are really right now starting over after divorce or separation or detachment, would you suggest that they don't avoid feeling their grief and really give themselves into that in order to expedite this process out, like expedite the recovery?
Yes. Uh, there are so many ways to do this. Listen to music if that is for you a conduit, as it is for many, to get to that low, sad place. Right. Um, take a really hot bath and experience pain. Pain will also express dopamine uh, because of the pain and counter effect, but it also makes your focus so tight meditatively that it's quite easy to cross from physical pain to emotional pain. So that's another technique people can use.
This is if people have cut themselves off.
Yes, they cut themselves off, yes.
So going through your senses or your body could be a better way to access those emotions.
That's another technique, yeah, another technique. And yet another one is to take walks in someplace beautiful, nature, where nobody can see you or hear you. Walk and talk to yourself in the third person. This has been studied, more effective than I'm feeling this or I'm feeling that. I know you're thinking this. I know you're feeling that. It's all right. I know right now you think that blah, 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 blah. And do this and even confront yourself in the third person as if you were your own therapist. Very helpful because you're keeping your striated muscles in movement, so you are feeling much more fluid. When we do that, we're not as inhibited. Areas of the brain are not active in the same way. And then talking aloud allows us to create a witness state where we can actually observe our own thoughts and feelings and ideas as they emerge instead of having them take hold of us, which they will if we're not observing them, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So talk to ourselves in the third person. Yes. This kind of almost like a self-therapist, a self-coach, ideally when you're around other people so they think you're nuts walking down the middle of the street.
Well, but today
I heard it on a podcast.
but today nobody knows whether you're on the phone or not. So you can get away with it.
Good point.
Yeah,
go and give it a go, everyone.
Too much.
But why is it so important, Stan, for people to detach from being held by their thoughts, to be in that observer or that witness state as you describe?
Because we have, Stephen Levine called the mind a radio stuck on. It's constantly blathering at us. Part of growing up is understanding and harnessing our own minds and knowing that a lot of it is garbage, a lot of it is noise. A lot of it has nothing to do with anything except that area of the brain that has a job to do, and I'm tuned into that station when I shouldn't be. For instance, obsession, right? That obsession station that's looping is gaining energy because it's hitting emotional centers in the brain. And so it's fueled by that in a loop, right? And if I'm really caught up in that, unless I'm a surgeon and I'm obsessing over the right instrument to use, that's useful, right? Or I'm a pilot, that's useful. I want to be obsessive compulsive, right? But if it's just, when I'm at night sleeping and signal has dropped, meaning, interactive speech, and my mind is quieting, all the flotsam and jetsam is floating up to the surface, that's noise, right? That is not necessarily wise to do. So I can watch those thoughts. I can, say judging if they're judging thoughts every time, or I can simply listen to a podcast and listen to spoken word, which competes with my own self-talk, and that'll do the trick as well. So not everything our mind tells us is true. In fact, a lot of it is not. And so we start to know what is our mind playing tricks on us and what is reality. Here are 3 areas that people need to watch out for. One is disappointment. The mind will constantly serve up disappointment because we're always comparing and contrasting this to that. That's an important feature for survival. It is not a good feature for happiness. Oh, everybody on my street has this particular car and I don't.
Like
Uh,
the comparison.
yes, yes.
Mm.
Oh, he's so he seems so dashing, but next to this other person, no, the other person seems better. Why aren't I with that person? Right? This person is getting old. I want someone young. I'm feeling old because of so that is a feature of the mind that a station we should not tune into, and when we do, ignore it. Very similarly, we have minds that are always aware of what we don't have, always aware of what's missing. Again, a feature for survival,
The
not a good
scarcity
feature.
mindset.
Yes, I'm aware of what I don't have. Oh, I don't feel with Shannon the way I did with Pamela. There's something wrong with Shannon. There's something I need to get someone who's going to give me what I felt Pamela did. Well, that's a mind trick. If I listen to it, I'm forever chasing something that can never be fulfilled because my mind is constantly doing that. And there are certain people in the attachment distancing group that do this a lot and they believe it and they talk themselves out of relationship quite easily because of this, because they don't understand that they're looking for something that does not exist and that is changing, which is the way they feel at every given moment is changing, and therefore their perceptions are changing. They haven't realized that, and they think that what they see and hear is actually real. It is tainted by their state of mind. This gets into neuroscience here, but it's important to know that all people are annoying, no exceptions. All people are difficult, a pain in the ass. If you have a partner, they are a burden, and so are you. Everyone's perfectly imperfect, and everyone is disappointing. No exceptions. And if you can accept that as truth, you're on your way towards having a meaningful relationship.
I want to ask you a question here and whether there's a possible caveat, because what springs to mind is in the context of abusive relationships
Yes.
where there's a constant power imbalance and somebody could be thinking, okay, I have to own my own shit, they've got to own theirs, and then you're approaching it on this level playing field, always hoping and trying to have that mutual understanding, but then that can just repeat a cycle of abuse. So what do you say in cases like that?
Well, I'm a proponent of something called secure functioning. And those people who know my work, I expect that couples, unless they agree to something else, that they come together as equals, sharing power, sharing absolute authority, two generals, two bosses, two executives, two drivers, no passengers, right? These two people must co create what they say the relationship must be. They must create their own ethical system of right and wrong, fairness, justice, right? That's what I expect of couples and myself and Tracy, but not everybody, does that. In fact, most don't. um, we're back to the attachment system, the biology that says to us, I can't quit you. It brings us together, and that's really good. It holds us together, which is also really good if two people are actually leveraging it to get what they absolutely think is fair and just. So you and I use the attachment system. I know you don't want to lose me. I don't want to lose you, right? Therefore, we stand for principles that are based on a purpose, based on what is best for us, best for us. And we're not going to get off of that until the other one finds their way on board. Now, we don't do that because we're afraid of losing that person. And so the worst thing about the attachment system is that it keeps me from staying or standing up to you based on my principles. I will forgo them because the dominant end is that I not lose you. This is where we have a problem in my field in dealing with attachment. People holding together when they should not. People who have a bad deal that they should get out of or renegotiate with strength, but they feel they cannot because they believe that the most important thing is that they don't lose whatever this is. People will talk in different ways. I don't want to lose the house, the children, I don't have money, I'm not prepared, all sorts of things. But make no mistake, it's that I can't quit you biology. That's in the
Mm.
brain, that is operating all the time, and that will haze our judgment if we're not careful. And that's why people will stay in relationships that are without equity.
Is that sometimes known as trauma bonding?
We can call it lots of things. We love to categorize. That's how we organize the world. So we can call it anything. But if you're someone like myself in this field, we're always trying to get to what is at the bottom of this, and how does the bottom of something manifest in all different ways. And one of them, yeah, trauma bonding, but it's still bonding. It's still I can't quit you. Uh,
Yeah, it's the attachment, the biological attachment that you're describing. Yeah.
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 So here's what happens in a nutshell. Anytime I bend reality, I am like an addict. I am weakening an executive function of my brain that is in charge of doing the right thing when the right thing is the hardest thing to do. So that's what addiction is. I'm going to feel better at the cost of doing better. And when I stick with you, I'm going to bend reality, make excuses, do all sorts of things, which is on the way to crazy because reality bending has a cost. Every time I do that, like addiction, I weaken this reality executive function of mine, and I'm further away from knowing or thinking about what is in my best interest. What is in my best interest, as opposed to what is pain avoiding right now because I cannot stand the pain. I need to do something right now.
And does this link a little to what you even describe in Wired for Love and elsewhere about you call them the ambassadors and the primitives,
Yes.
like understanding the different functions of our brain and when we're in charge, when we're switched on and making conscious aware decisions versus when we're acting out of survival?
Yes. And we cannot underestimate our survival instinct. It's always on. It uses pattern recognition, which is lightning fast, which is why we get into fights quickly. And we make all these mistakes because we're using pattern recognition. We're not using critical thought. Maybe you're not trying to do that right now, right? So the problem is these primitives, subcortical regions that actually run our lives, when most of the time, when our heart rates go up to a certain level, our blood pressure goes up to a certain level, we have changes in the brain and the body that make us more animalistic, more automatic, more reflexive, more self-preserving, and not as thoughtful, not as gracious, not as compassionate, and definitely not thinking in terms of what's the best thing I could do. Right? I
Yes,
want to
it's
feel better right now. Yeah.
yeah, the automatism and the reactivity. I guess are there any practical strategies that you suggest for people to shift if they recognize, maybe they don't even recognize, and that's part of it, but they're in that survival mode, they're acting from that part that's automatic, that's reactive, that's driven by survival. How can they shift from that into a calmer, more regulated, more conscious aware state?
If you're in a couple, that's the best thing because then you can work with each other and do something called interactive regulation or co-regulation. So here you and I are talking about a stressful subject. If I'm smart, I'm going to keep my eyes on you and I'm going to be directly in front of you at a relatively close distance. We need to be able to do that because we're legally blind on the sides. So I keep an eye on you just as if you and I were on a high wire and I had to watch your state of mind because your state of mind could kill me, right? If you start to get wobbly, I have to stabilize you. Same thing. As soon as I start to see you move out of safety by watching your face and your eyes, I stop what I'm doing and I return you to safety stat. Because if I do not, game over. If I do not, I've lost my audience and I walk away with nothing. Therefore, I must do that. Your safety and security at all times is what I am in charge of. You're in charge of mine at all times. That makes us a really good regulatory team. And that's how we get through tough things without going off road and getting into the tar pit or weeds and not getting out, right? But actually getting things done, actually working through things. But we have to understand how this works, how all of us work. Yeah.
So eye contact is a big one in terms of the co-regulation.
Yeah.
What else?
I have to see my effect on you. Looking away is putting me in jeopardy because now I can't see my effect on you. For all I know, I've said something offending. I'm going to get punched as soon as I look back. So it's not smart. What else? Practicing, because we're all predictable. Predict what you're going to do the next time you start to get out of sorts. What would you do next time to get yourself out or to keep yourself out? If your partner does something that upends you, they're predictable. Plan. Go through your mind as if you were dealing with a boss that's a difficult boss. You can't change your boss. You have to do something different, right? You're going to practice. How would I approach this a-hole? So that I can do my job and do well and not have to deal with them.
And not scream and slam the doors or quit in a jiffy.
Right, exactly. Because all people are difficult, some more than others. And so it's my job to predict you and to be able to know, as the animal I picked, to know how to handle you in the best way without using a stick or a whip. I have to be a master at you. I have to study you. I have to do trial and error. I have to know exactly how to shift you from every different state. Otherwise, I won't feel competent. And if I don't feel competent, I'm less likely to like you. That's how we are as human beings. And you're not going to feel as safe. So that's another thing. Start to study your partner. Stop pointing fingers. Look at what you could have done differently. I'm not talking about being in an abusive relationship. I'm talking about, with a good enough partner that's perfect, right? A good enough partner. What can I do next time, as you would your child, that would be a step ahead of them, that predicts what they're going to do? If they do this, I'll do that, because I want to change the entire trajectory of this loop we get into every time. I alone could do that. We have evidence in that way.
An example comes to mind. I just want, and maybe this can link into a little about the attachment styles. I kind of recognize I don't know exactly what I am, maybe disorganized or the anxious. I know you have a different categorizing, but I know that my partner is more avoidant. And if there's ever a moment of tension, his automatic reflex would be to leave. He would get like flustered and I'm going out for a walk, I'm going for a drive. And I now recognize that that is the pattern. I kind of lean in more and I want to sort it out and I kind of go in, whereas he retreats. But then I think what I've noticed helps is if I say, let's say I put my hand on his or touch his shoulder and I say, darling, don't leave. We can talk. Well, let's talk through this calmly or something. Like it has helped, I think, even him recognize that impulse, that trigger to just leave, to escape, to run.
Yes.
And then the touch could help in terms of the regulation, co-regulation, staying in safety, staying connected in conflict.
If he's an island, which is what you're describing a little bit, an island is, we gave nautical names to attachment organizations just to make them friendlier. So island, anchor, wave. Islands are from the distancing group of avoidance, conflict avoidance, of keeping secrets, of not wanting to hold contact, physical contact, eye contact, talk about the relationship very long. They want to get out of Dodge. They tend to be addicted to alone time. All these features that are predictable if you study babies, right? As opposed to waves, who are also anxious, both sides anxious, who fear abandonment, rejection, punishment, right? And tend to cling more. The other tends to fear losing their autonomy, losing their freedom, losing their stuff, right? And so knowing this actually is very, very helpful because they're not doing it purposely. They're doing it automatically as a safety and security matter, not love. So if your partner is an island, then touch usually wouldn't be the answer. More so for you, perhaps. He would need to know, perhaps, that you are better with touch, moving forward, eye contact, comforting words, and so on. For him, going to the side of him instead of full frontal is better. Dropping things, saying, yeah, let's drop it and change the topic and do something different. We'll come back. This way you can still stay with him and he can still stay, but the threat is lowered because his feeling trapped is lessened, right? The threat. These are people, by the way, who only know how to flee. Their growth edge is to learn how to have boundaries and to learn to be their true selves in a relationship rather than outside of one, right? So that's a challenge. And knowing that is a big old handle that you can move around. Grab what you want, catch and release. Come here, look in my eyes, tell me you love me, and make me believe it. And then you can go along your way. You get what you want, you don't wait. And they're relaxed because they are being told, I'm not going to hold you, and I get you. It doesn't bug me, but I'm going to get what I want. Now you can run along. This tricks the system, and it actually goes towards reducing their shame about their need to distance because they like it so well when you go away. They feel very guilty and ashamed about that. It's because of interpersonal stress is lowered. It's not because they don't love. It's because the interpersonal stress is constantly on with people in the distancing group. They find the primary attachment system smothering and threatening in ways that usually the other partner doesn't because they've not had any other experience. Once they do, the attachment system begins to change.
It's probably one of the unsexiest things, but I'm just hearing that safety is everything.
Safety and security is everything. Yeah. Some people
Right?
like to play with it. Some people, like teenagers in adulthood, they want to make each other a little bit dangerous, and that makes them feel a little sexier. But in my experience, those relationships are not as safe and secure, and they suffer from a lot of other problems. And so I would not toy with safety and security ever. You can have a great erotic relationship with your partner and still be safe and secure. That is entirely possible.
Hmm. I'd say in some level that's the whole basis of it, of
Yeah,
being.
it's no guarantee, but there's no guarantee anywhere about eroticism, being constant, and it isn't, by the way. That is a fantasy. But making love for all time can be maintained if people understand what that is. That is not performative. It is not with a dominant end of any kind. It is actually being present and attentive for bursts of time without distraction. That is how we used to play it before all of our distractions. And that is, making love is really getting to know you, getting to know all about you.
Yeah.
And that continues throughout the lifespan.
I'm going to move into the final fast few questions now, Stan.
Okay.
And the first thing I want to ask is, what is, for people here wanting to understand how they show up more in relationships, what is some key things they can start asking themselves?
Ask yourself not about who the perfect person is. What is the perfect relationship? Write down everything you can about how you view the perfect relationship with person X, especially if you're currently in relationship with a person. You want person X because you don't want your history tainting or altering this this diary or meditation. Start with safety and security. We have each other's backs at all times. We protect each other in public and private. We never threaten the relationship. And if we're going to get out, we just get out. We tell each other everything because the right and left hand must know the same thing if we are to be in charge of everyone and everything. Go down the list of what it must be, but start with the word we. And what you do. Keep feelings and emotions out because you can't legislate them. Behavior is where you want to stick. This is your 10 commandments. Make it simple, like a 5-year-old can understand, that you could make an engraving of, short and pithy. That, having that idea, going all the way to sex, emotion, affection, spirituality, exploration, all those things, this is what we do. This is what we do. And that will help you find or decide what you're going to talk to your partner about. Because it's really the relationship that's going to sustain. People disappoint. And you need to find somebody who's willing to go on the road with you and willing to get on board with whatever this is that you decide, and has the same vision, is pointing in the same direction, except nothing less.
I love that. And I think you point to something where I think we often go wrong in being so individualistic in how we approach our relationships, all about satisfying our personal needs, and rather than seeing it as the us coming together and the give and take.
Absolutely. Two people, if they get along and can work together as a team, are better than one, stronger, can do anything that is actually physically possible. All they have to do is point together and decide they want to go here and they want to never have this happen. You and I can make those agreements, those social contracts with each other, because if we break those contracts, if they are supporting both of us, we both lose. Therefore, you're not going to violate those principles, because that is what ensures our survival. And that's what I hope to change people's minds with, is that they start thinking in this way, in terms of terms and conditions, not love.
Yeah,
Do a
interesting.
performance review of your relationship. If you both suck, it's time to build this thing together.
Second, I want to go back to your Swiss cheese idea,
Yeah.
or your wife's Swiss cheese idea, and our kind of core wounds, let's say, that we have. How can people listening who maybe are not aware of what those are discover, in fact, what the underlying, say, wounds or fears are, rather than constantly acting out their triggers and putting the problem on the event or the situation rather than what it triggers within themselves?
That's a good question. One can only do that when relaxed. The time to do that isn't in the heat of battle or just after coming off of one. People should not dismiss the idea that relationships are less about why you do something than it is about don't. Stop it or do it. Think in that way. I don't want you doing this. It triggers me. I don't care why you're doing it. I don't care why I don't like it. I don't. And if I don't like it, you're not going to like what I do. Therefore, it's bad for both of us. So let's put something in place to stop this from repeating, because if it repeats, we're in a whole lot of trouble. That's called accruing threat memory, which causes inflammation, literally and figuratively. And that gets really hard to undo, right? So we have to work together on behavior. And I'm not a behavioralist, but I do believe that behavior wags the tail of feelings. So it doesn't matter to me that you feel I looked at you a certain way that felt threatening. If you saw it, I did it. I don't argue with that. If I believe the relationship is more important than being right, I'm moving up a higher level of moral reasoning, and I fall on my sword for the union, because the union is what keeps me safe and secure, right? Not being right. So this is a different ball game, a whole different game that we have to understand and play, or we'll go to war. And we do that as human primates very easily, very easily. if we don't watch out. In fact, that's where we tend to go naturally. So we really have to raise the bar, be wiser, smarter, be better than the average human primate, which, by the way, is like your average 2-year-old. I don't think you want to give your 2-year-old an AR-14 and all the rights that adults have, because you're not going to wake up the next morning. So we are animals that are warlike, that are aggressive, selfish, self-centered, opportunistic, moody, fickle, and racist. We've always been that way, and we always will be that way. The only thing that stops us from doing whatever we want is by having principles that we adhere to, that we believe in, that force us, if we buy into them, to do the right thing, the best thing, when it's the hardest thing to do. That's what we want. Otherwise, we're going to create mayhem. If we're under a certain amount of stress, pressure, or fear, or pain, we're going to do something that's going to violate the other person's rights and sensibilities without question. The only thing that keeps us from doing that is a sense of structure, purpose, meaning, and principles that protect each other from each other. That has to happen. Has to.
I'm feeling all of the pragmatism from you.
Because it's hard to do, but it is doable. And I got to tell you, because I live this, it's hard, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
Every bit. Because it's about aspiring to something better than we ordinarily are. And together we can do that. We can make each other do that if we give each other permission to enforce that which we place as a commandment, as a principle that we abide by, because we decided to.
Where I want to finish is with a closing message to the people listening who have perhaps recently gone through a separation, a divorce, feeling that heartbreak and that difficulty. What is a final message that you would give to them?
One, it passes. Two, if you allow yourself to not run from this, grieve, learn, even a time to go into personal therapy is the best time coming off of a separation or divorce. Suffering, unfortunately, is the only thing that makes us better people. I wish I could say otherwise. Suffering is the one thing that gets us to actually consider who we are, why we are, where we come from, and how are we going to not do this again. Suffering and regret. If you cannot experience regret, you will not learn. And so I hate to say this because I know it's horrible, horrible, horrible. Live with it. You will come out better than you were, more complex, more compassionate, wiser, smarter. That's what you get for it. It's like the cocoon, right? The caterpillar is eventually going to be a butterfly. That's the light at the end of the tunnel, if you can believe that, because it is true.
Yeah, I believe it. It's what this whole podcast is about. Stan, it really is. Thank you so much for sharing all of your, your wisdom, your opinions, your stories, all of it. It's been wonderful.
It's been fun. I really enjoyed this time with you.